So this is science and non-duality. The whole project is how to bring science and non-duality together. Non-duality here, of course, is not just non-duality, it's spiritual teachings, the mystical understanding of humanity, how to bring science and modern science the way it has been developing, and the deepest spiritual teaching. So, and the topic this year is the nature of consciousness. I thought, that's great. That's a good kind of way of trying to bring non-duality and scientific understanding, which Stuart thought gave a good example of how things are developing in science, all the way to understanding life and consciousness. But I thought for the two, for non-duality and for science to meet, to dialogue, we need to understand where each one of them is coming from. What is really the view of non-duality, and how does it view the scientific perspective? And how does science, the world of science, views the mystical traditions and non-dual experience? You see, we need to have that understanding for there to be a true meeting, instead of just talking about it, instead of actually the two touching each other, so that there is a mutual benefit. Not all spiritual teachings look at consciousness as from the perspective of non-duality. Non-dual realization is a realization of many teachings. Vedanta, for instance, in India, Dzogchen and Mahamudra in Buddhism, and even the Sufis, the Sufi teachings about the unity of existence. It's all about how everything is one, everything is of the nature of consciousness, as Peter was saying. But we need to listen to what Maharaj, Nisargadatta Maharaj, says in his quote that was put there. He said, consciousness is the greatest painter. The whole world is a picture. Meaning everything is a picture that consciousness paints. Everything, you and what you consider you, I, the world, the universe, the stars, atoms, microtubules, all of those are nothing but consciousness and the way consciousness manifests itself. They don't really exist the way that people take them. In other words, although I like Hameroff and Penrose's theory about microtubules and quantum fluctuations, microtubules, I think it's a really promising theory. But you notice, it hasn't been universally accepted by physicists or scientists, but from the perspective of non-duality, microtubules are just the way consciousness manifests things. There are no really microtubules. Scientists see microtubules. Scientists conceptualize things like microtubules, but in reality it's all consciousness making an appearance or an idea of microtubules. So one of the basic things that non-duality says, and like Nisargadatta Maharaj in a quote, is that really the way the world as seen by most people, by ordinary consciousness, the world as known conventionally, what's called conventionally, which science has been studying and the way, including the way scientists see it, whether it's a classical perspective or quantum perspective, or it's all really illusion. It's not, there's no microtubules, there's no brains. If you notice all the theories of consciousness, the brain is very important. But from the perspective of consciousness, brain is nothing but consciousness manifesting something that somebody calls a brain. You see, Nisargadatta Maharaj did not think his experience was interpreted by his brain. He thought his brain is created by him, by his consciousness. In other words, consciousness is the greatest painter, in meaning that the consciousness, or what Sufis call being, or Buddha called true nature, Buddha nature, is so fundamental that the usual view of there are people and who have individual experiences, and some of these people are scientists who study those experiences, try to understand what is it, what is this matter, what is the basis of matter, and going deeper into studies of matter, into atoms, elementary particles, all the way to quarks and strings and all those. From the perspective of the non-dualist, it doesn't matter what it is. Is it classical or quantum or whatever? It's all an illusionary way of experiencing reality. The idea is to recognize that you are consciousness and everything's consciousness. And that is the freedom. And this experience of realization of non-duality has been like this for 1,000 years, regardless of what the scientific point of view is. Scientific point of view keep changing. In 100 years, science might be completely different. The thing we think about science now, might be seen as just the beginning, where some strands. Actually, Roger Penrose himself, that Stewart mentioned. I just read him recently saying that he believes that science will need several more revolutions before science understands physical world. And it will take longer to understand consciousness. Although he has a theory of consciousness as the quantum computation and microtube, but he isn't taking it to be the ultimate word of understanding consciousness. He said we're not close to understanding what consciousness is, not alone physical reality. But the point, first, there are two things I'm going to say. I'm trying to clarify. First, there is the how things appear from non-dual reality. How things appear from non-dual reality, from pure consciousness, is pure consciousness is a vast conscious field, vast conscious spaciousness that has no end, no beginning, no depth, and it's mysterious. The Indian will say Satchidananda. It is both consciousness and it is also being and it is also good blissfulness. Sufis will say it's pure being. Buddhists will say it's an empty awareness. But the whole idea is that there is something that is conscious, that is aware. And that is not individual, it is universal, it's everywhere. And it is manifesting all these experiences that including manifesting individuals who believe they have experiences. So from the perspective of non-duality, that the average individual, including most scientists, are actually deluded. Believing that there is an electron going through the double slit experiment, and then electron can pass through one slit or seen as a wave pass through two slits. From the perspective of the non-dualist, no, there is no electron. There is nothing that moves this way. Everything is created every instant. The neuroscientists saying we don't know what we perceive. The brain interprets what the input from our senses, and that input then creates a picture, and we see that the world, from the perspective of non-dualist, there's no input going into the brain. That is a story you're telling yourself. The arising of the light, the sound, and the movement of sound, and the brain itself, all of those are created as one unified picture. And this picture is like a movie screen, is each keeps moving in one frame at a time, and the movement of the frame appears as if there's an electron that moved and went to the eyes, and it's read an electron or whatever it has, and then we have a theory that the brain interpreted that. But the brain itself is seen from the perspective of non-duality as nothing but a manifestation. Just like the whole body, the whole universe is all a manifestation of the same consciousness. And we are not awakened, we are not free, we're not liberated if we don't recognize we are this pure awareness, this pure truth. But the thing, that's the view of non-duality. I'm not saying I'm buying that. I'm saying that's what non-dualists say. I know the experience. I live non-duality. I've lived in it for 20 years or so. Before that, I lived a few decades in duality, right? And then, experiencing non-duality, and everything is non-dual, and everything is from the perspective of non-duality, is really delusional, even though people in the dualistic world believe they are improving in their understanding of the physical world. Maybe they are, but from the perspective of the non-dualists, it's irrelevant for them. The realization in Nisargadatta Maharaj, before it, Ramana Maharshi, 1,000 years ago, somebody else, it's always non-duality, it's always creating the universe, regardless how we understand the universe, you see. So the world is an illusion. It's an illusion in the sense, it's not exactly how the average person takes it to be, not even how the scientists take it to be. Whether the scientist is a classical scientist, or quantum physicist, or a neuroscientist, it's just different stories to explain things from a delusional perspective, the perspective that there are separate brains there, and each one is having some kind of interpretation of experience. Our whole thing is created by consciousness. It's all delusionary. So we need to understand that non-dualists don't care. The real non-dualist doesn't care which scientific theory or how science is going, you see. So I think Mauricio and Zaya are courageous by saying, let's bring non-duality to science, you see, because non-dualists say science, whether it's the time of Euclid and Democritus, or it's the time of Leibniz and Newton, or the time of Einstein and Planck, or now, from the non-dual experience continues the same. Everything is a manifestation of consciousness, and to believe it one way or another is just changing the story from one thing to another, one reality. It's all an error. There are no individual people there who are having individual experiences, and so the idea of interpreting everything in terms of microtubule or brains is already physically reductionistic from the perspective of the non-dualist. And from the perspective, there isn't a brain. A brain is nothing but a figment of thought. Is really, actually, as I experience now, as I look at you all, it's all radiance, all a manifestation of light. So the non-dual view is that consciousness is an infinite indeterminate medium that manifests time and space and matter and all of that. But time and space and matter, that's how it is seen from the perspective when we are not in non-duality. When we are in non-duality, all these things are seen as nothing but the picture that non-duality paints. So that's the first view. I want to clarify what non-duality says. Now I want to clarify what scientists say. You see. Then the other way of looking at it is, this is, and that's true, and I know this from my experience right now. As I talk about it, my experience becomes non-dual, and I see everything as unified, and there's no separation. It's all, there's no single brain. It's all a picture. Everything is, as Nisargadatta Maharaj said, all of it is one picture, and this picture dynamically is changing, unfolding. And whether at the time of Euclid, or the time of Newton, or time of Einstein, or our time, the picture changes, the story changes, but it's always a picture being generated by the consciousness. It's always the appearance of consciousness, always the appearance of this free light, this blissful, immaterial where the world simply glistens. And this glistening is what we call our experience of the world. At the same time, this is the non-dual perspective. At the same time, we also know, even for Nisargadatta Maharaj, even though he sees everything as arising in consciousness, he's even the source of awareness and consciousness, he himself has to go to the toilet regularly. And he has to wipe his ass. Regardless how much everything is he is just consciousness, he still has to wipe his ass regularly. And regardless how realized is the non-dualist, when they see the picture of the street and the cars, they make sure that their body doesn't cross in front of a car. Physical reality is still there, and its laws are still operative, regardless of how much we recognize it, we think of it as a delusion. So a delusion or an illusion doesn't mean really that the physical world doesn't really have its own truth. Non-dualists say it doesn't have its own truth. It is really a mistaken way of looking at consciousness's manifestation. But when we consider experience itself, even the pure non-dual master, they still have to deal with physical matter. They still have to deal with illness. The highest Tibetan Lamas use airplanes to come to the US and get surgeries for their illnesses, even though they know it's all delusion. Right? The physical world for them, they still have to deal with it. That's useful for them, even though they think it's delusion. So there's something about the physical world that defies the insights of non-duality. It says, regardless how much you think I'm a delusion, you're going to be better be careful. Don't assume that the delusion or the illusion mean you do not consider the physical world in the way materialist thinks of it, the way positivist thinks of it, the way scientists think of it. The world, so the way I look at it is that even somebody like Nisargadatta Maharaj or myself right now, experiencing everything as consciousness, even though everything is consciousness, the fact that there is a world, a physical reality, there are people in it, and there is interaction, and this physical world has laws that apply to it, it doesn't disappear. It's still there. So from the perspective of the average individual, and science is nothing but an average individual who's trying to study this average experience to understand what it is. What is this experience? What are these matters? What are atoms? What are stars? What are these galaxies that we see? What is the experience we have as neuroscience? If they're all going to, that is a way of experiencing the world. So the world of a scientist is not the world of non-duality. The world of the scientist is the physical world. We might call it classically it's the physical world with billiard ball sort of laws, in the sense, cars, if they hit each other, they crash. But quantum physics will say, well, there is no such thing as a crash until you perceive the crash, right? Meaning, so you can look at it classically, or you can look at it quantum mechanically. And interesting, and the thing that we find is that this physical world, this regular, ordinary world, that a non-dual says is illusionary, is not the way it is. If it is illusionary, that's not how things are. How come this physical world has an order? It has an order to it, even when we're not aware of that it is all consciousness. When ordinary people recognize it has order. The order was recognized by all the way from the Greeks. Euclid had his theory, and there's Pythagoras' theorem, for instance. This world follows Pythagoras' theorem, completely. And developed, and Newton showed that there are laws of motion, laws of gravity that this world obeys. So this physical world, which is an illusion, is interesting from the perspective of non-duality, it's an illusion. But from the perspective of the people who are just normal people, it is a world that has order, and the order can be understood scientifically. And the science has developed to the point that we can actually measure it with mathematical precision. And we can predict with mathematical precision. So, so the scientists, when most scientists hear everything is consciousness, all is delusion, they think this is just mystical talk. It's sort of like superstition, because science, we should remember, became scientific by divorcing itself from the church, from religion. Liberated itself and became scientific by not taking the religious point of view to be the description of reality. It said, no, we'll have to do experiments. We'll have to have theories, hypotheses, and we have to test them with experiment, and the experiments have to be verified and repeated, and all the whole thing developed by getting away from the religion and its beliefs. So now to come to tell the scientists, no, everything is really consciousness, everything is God, basically, the scientists say, wait a minute, we became scientists by pushing that away. And now you're wanting to tell us that we are wrong, we are all deluded. So most scientists, when they hear about non-duality and that everything is consciousness, they don't believe it. they think those people are being sort of naive, and really they're mystical in the sense that they're sort of somewhat superstitious. And they continue, the scientists continue with their world and exploring things, and now they are trying to understand consciousness. As Peter said, now the hard problem of science is, what is consciousness? It wasn't considered, and now is being considered in the last few decades. But it's not considered from the perspective, it is all, everything is consciousness. And it's considered from the fact, recognizing there are living beings who have the capacity to have experience, to be conscious. And exploring that, trying to understand consciousness from that perspective. And they make it as Stuart has just talked, they've made great stride trying to understand where consciousness comes from. Maybe it has to do with the deep space-time geometry structure, as Penrose says, quantum gravity. It's a gravity that brings the radical, the collapse of the wave function. A theory that the gravity brings about the collapse of the wave function is a radical theory in quantum theory. Most, quantum theorists don't accept it, but he still has his people and he has his theory. But an interesting theory, and other people have their theory. So quantum theory is bringing the whole world into question about what is it. But they're not thinking that it is all consciousness. They're wondering, what is it? When they say it's all superposition, it's all waves, with the many probabilities of how it can be. Only when you make the observation, what you see, particle. They really believe they're particles. An electron is an electron by itself. From Nisargadatta Maharaj, no, there is no electron. An electron is nothing, it is just the appearance of consciousness. No single electron that goes through one slit or another. So the double slit experiment, from a perspective of non-dualist, just like anything else, just eating your meal. It's all the same delusion. But for the scientists, no, it's a real thing and has developed science. So, I'm giving two perspectives, the non-dual perspective and the scientific perspective. And science has seen there's order with mathematical precision and has come up with discoveries, and quantum theory has developed our world all the way to all of our digital devices and all this technology, all from the development of science. And then to say it's all a delusion for the scientists, what are you talking about? Look at what we've done. If we're all deluded, how did we do all of that? So we need to think a little more carefully. We need to consider the situation more carefully before we say it's delusion or illusion, or take the physicalist scientific perspective. It is really just individuals that have developed through the theory of evolution. And now they have brains, and the brain interprets data, and this data becomes our experience of the world, which is the way how science sees it now. And the data could be looked at from a classical perspective, and the way which is how most people look at it. You see people, or from a quantum perspective, So, so the idea that I have, my experience, the way to look at it, because we want the two to come together, right? Non-duality and science to come together, but they are so sounds so opposed to each other. Because each one of them thinks the other is full of shit, basically. Many scientists here, see how they connect. They believe in non-duality, you see. But most scientists don't. Most scientists, even the question, the expression of consciousness is sort of at the fringes of science. Main quantum physicists and scientists and biologists are busy doing all kinds of things, creating computers and curing cancer, stuff like that. They're doing something very useful even for non-dual teachers. So, the proposal I have, which comes from my direct experience, is that the non-dual universe, the non-dual way of experiencing, is one way of experiencing reality. Obviously, it's a valid, true way of experiencing reality. We could call it the non-dual perspective of reality. The scientific point of view, which is making precise the ordinary dualistic point of view, is also a way of experiencing reality that is just as valid. It is valid and it's true, because as I said, Nisargadatta Maharaj has to wipe his ass anyway, regardless how much it is made out of light. You see? So he doesn't negate physical reality, but in his experience, this is all really in his mind. And we say, well, how about if they're both true? Why do we have to take one position instead of the other? Why not give each one of them, say, the non-dual perspective is completely correct and self-validating and can be repeated by others and has been repeated throughout thousands as a way of experiencing reality. And the other way, the ordinary way, the dualistic way, with its development of science, which is based mostly on duality. Science is based on duality, not on non-duality. Having particles collide in the hadron colliders is the dualistic way of looking at things. There are many particles that are colliding. It's not just a picture of unified thing that is happening. You see. And I know there are people who have developed what's called unified field theories and M theory and all of that, and the whole universe is, but it's still a dualistic perspective. They have not been mathematically rigorous, scientific way of connecting consciousness, non-dual consciousness, to physical reality yet. And there's no unified field theory has done that yet. We don't have that. Maybe it will happen. But I'm saying, why do we have to think that one of them is right and the other is wrong? Why can't both be correct? That the world can be experienced in two distinct, different worlds. Each one of them has its own validity and truth and usefulness. And that human beings live in both worlds simultaneously all the time. We can be aware of one of them more than the other. And non-dual is more aware of the non-dual view than most people. But most people are not aware of the non-dual view. They're just aware of bodies and stars, and if they are biologists looking through the microscope, they see molecules and atoms and cells and microtubules and all of that. And quantum physicists can think about theories and superposition and all of that. You see, and it's all that's one way of looking at things. And maybe they will meet, because
I'm not saying they are different realities. I'm saying it's the same reality, but maybe that same reality can be experienced in many ways. One of the ways is the non-dualist way, which many teachings have developed. The other way is the ordinary way that has developed into our science. I say this mostly because I'm telling you where each one stands, where the non-dualist stand, and where the scientist stands. I'm saying both point of views are real and valid because I do not live in either one of them. I don't live in non-dual reality, and I don't live in dualistic reality. For me, there are two ways of many ways of experiencing reality. Sometimes I experience a non-dual, sometimes dual, sometimes both together, sometimes has nothing to do with it. Reality has many ways of experiencing. In fact, there are teachings don't talk about non-duality, and they think non-duality or duality is our irrelevant way of looking at the world. And they are really teaching, ancient teaching and modern teaching that they don't think of, they know of non-duality, but they don't think of it as the only way. Not that it's wrong, but there are other ways of experiencing things. Another way of experiencing reality, for instance, I call it unilocal reality, unilocal realization. Unilocal realization is the experience of consciousness, property of consciousness. Not that the consciousness is manifesting everything. No, it's more like consciousness. Everything includes everything else. Every point has all points of time and space. What kind of realization is that? It's non-dual, and it's not dual. And that's not where I stand. I don't stand in any of those. But for me, I can experience either one of them and then see its validity. And I'm saying maybe the way that science and non-duality can become a true contribution, can bring science and non-duality together, is by first us becoming rigorous about the situation. Not try to take the scientific point of view and say science getting closer to non-duality. They're showing that the dual world is really a mistaken way of experiencing things. Like there's really no matter, it's all space. But it's true, it's all space. But the space that the scientists talk about is not the space that the non-dualist is experiencing. The space that the non-dualist is experiencing is similar to what Roger Penrose called twister space. If you're mathematical physics, you might have heard twister space. Twister space for him is the fundamental space that generates what we call time and space. It's more fundamental. And each point of that twister space is a ray of light. I like that idea, although for him, twister space is a mathematical construct, cannot be really experienced. So sound similar. So the same way, non-dualist, they're talking about something invisible, most people can't see, but it's manifesting physical reality. So I'm saying, to really make science and non-duality become rigorous, where scientists in general, not just a few scientists here who have a spiritual background, but scientists in general can listen to it. And so that non-dual people need to acknowledge that the world of science has its truth. The scientists are doing something that has truth to it. And that is, there is a way of experiencing it, and there is a non-dual way of experiencing this. And what we can do is to find the interface between these two ways of experiencing. Not having to reduce one to the other. Because what most people are trying to do is try to reduce one to the other. Scientists are trying to reduce all the spiritual into physical, all consciousness to a physical thing, the brain, or the neurons, or microtubules, you see. And the non-dualists are all trying to reduce everything to just pure consciousness, and everything is just mind, is just the way things appear. And I'm saying, how about if we can take both points of view as valid and see where they interface? And obviously, one of the places they interface, there are many places where they interface. One of the places they interface, for instance, is the existence of psi phenomena, extrasensory perception. But the most obvious place they interface is that there are living beings who have the capacity of consciousness. They have consciousness, they have experience, which is similar to what the non-dual is saying, there's consciousness. Consciousness is the base of everything. So, but here, there is consciousness here, consciousness here, and science is trying to understand consciousness. No, so that's why I think the topic of this particular conference goes to the very heart of how we can maybe find an interface of science and non-duality by studying consciousness. You see, and science is trying to study consciousness, but they're not studying it from the perspective of non-duality, just as Peter said. They're not thinking it's all, everything is consciousness. They're thinking, no, consciousness has to do with the brain. So we're still, as Penrose says, many revolution away from really understanding consciousness from the perspective of science. But at least it's a place where the two ways of experiencing reality interface, because there is consciousness there. And the non-duality says all consciousness. Scientific point of view said, well, there is consciousness here. People have consciousness. What's that about? You see, let's explore it. And maybe the two can cooperate then, can listen to each other with more respect. To tell the scientists, you're deluded by believing that you exist. There's no way to start a dialogue. For the scientists to tell the non-dualists, you're superstitious. You know, we left religion a long time ago, and we want to look at things scientifically, experimentally, in a very viable, repeatable experience that we could measure with our instruments. Otherwise, we won't believe you. To start that way only, also not a way to begin a dialogue. But if we have the attitude of respecting both perspectives and recognizing, even when we have non-dual experience, that the physical world continues with its obeying its usual physical laws. Still, the law of gravity functions. You know, and the law of electromagnetism and Maxwell equations function beautifully. Even when you make it relativistic, even more precise. To say it's all delusion is like it's dismissive of something beautiful, wonderful. You know, a world that has been developing and creating and understanding. about reality, a way reality manifests itself. And I'm saying, let's give each one of them their dues and see where they meet, where they interface. Because science and non-duality will need to find those interfaces. And I think consciousness is a good place to interface. So from a non-dualist perspective, consciousness is not the thing, as Peter said. It's the fact of experiencing. And you could say, all scientists are living in experience. That is true from a non-dual perspective. From a scientific perspective, they don't see that. They see that they are human physical beings who have instruments who can maybe, and one of those times, are going to be able to measure consciousness. Who knows what they're going to measure at some point? Megahertz, as what kind of megahertz, which level of megahertz might be more appropriate. That would be interesting to see, because there have been results. Our technology, our medicine, all of that has benefited mankind. And it arose out of materialistic, positivistic point of view. To dismiss it all as illusion is sort of, in some sense, regardless how enlightened I am, to take that point of view, I'm a little one-sided. I'm not that open, really. To be truly open is to say, yes, there's this way of experiencing this, and there's this way of experiencing thing, and each one is true, and sometimes, obviously, even in non-dual realization, physical reality continues. Cars, when they collide, they crash, people die. Even though it's a delusion, but people die anyway, and it hurts. And if I'm in that, I as an individual with this body into that accident, I'll be in the hospital and be experiencing, all kind of experiences. And they're all consciousness, but they will have pain in them, and they have morphine and stuff like that, you see. So I'm proposing, that's my proposition, and that we respect both point of view and have them see how they interface. I'm serious about it. I'm not saying it's just a strategy. I'm saying no. The non-dual point of view is a real, authentic way of experiencing things. The dualistic, scientific point of view is the real way of experiencing things. Reality is much bigger than non-dual or dual. It's something much more indefinite than that. It can be experienced itself dualistically, can experience itself non-dualistically. When it experiences itself dualistically, it develops things like science and all of that, and biology and quantum theory and string theory and and twister theory and all of that. Interesting, you see. And God knows, when we allow the other ways of experiencing reality, how things are going to happen. So now I'm just proposing two. I know many, but I think two is enough for us, because science and non-duality is just juxtaposing these two. So I think that good for now. I pay homage to the two ways that reality expresses itself.